Hi, I'm Paavan Mathema. I am currently the Chief Correspondent for AFP, which is a French wire news agency. We cover almost everything from Nepal, all news that might be of international interest. I've been in this job, I've been with AFP for over 5 years now. But apart from that, I also write stories and sometimes poems.
Okay, thank you, Paavan, for the intro. So you said wire agency. So for the benefit of our audience, would you like to tell us what a wire agency is?
Well, this is how I explain to most people when I have to tell them what I do. तपाईँहरूले पत्रिका पल्टाउनु हुँदाखेरि, when you look at the international page, you will see news from all around the world and being credited to agencies like Reuters, AP, AFP, Xinhua, DPA, where you worked as well. So these wire agencies have journalists all around, stationed all around the world, and newspapers subscribe to them so that they can get authentic, well-researched work from outside their country as well.
And I think there are over 30 wire agencies in the world, and if I'm not wrong, BBC and CNN also have their wire service, and they're, I think, the only TV networks that also have that also function as wire agency apart from other news agencies, right? So with your work for the wire agency, I assume that every other year you would be running around doing the coverage for the mountaineering season right now, because March, April, May, the wire reporters get very busy trying to cover the mountaineering season. But this year has been really different. But also, from what I read on your Instagram, you were still in the Everest region, right? Just ahead of the lockdown. Tell us about it. How did that happen, and how did it go, and how did you get back to Kathmandu during just ahead of the lockdown?
Yes, actually during the lockdown. As you said, this is our busiest season every year. It's bread and butter. A lot of older reporters for wire agencies talk about 3 M's that they cover. So monarchy, Maoists, and mountaineering. So monarchy or Maoist, mountaineering is still something that gets international.
Yeah, but when I was covering, for me, it were the same 3 M's, and I was told you always have to make sure you cover the monarchy, the Maoist.
Right.
Okay.
Especially after all the expeditions were cancelled, our plan was to go to the Everest region and see the impact the cancellation will have. Every year people wait for the season for the bulk of their income. This is their main business time, So we were planning to do that, and we had landed in Lukla and were in Fatling, which is about 4 hours from Lukla, when we heard that the government had announced a lockdown. So it was my photographer and me, and we were both talking about, what we should do next. And but it seemed like, we were already there, and lockdown khulne wala to thiyena, so even if we went down to Lukla, we would have to wait. Well, we're here already, let's just go and, story and meet the people. So we mathi destination चाहिँ Khumzung भन्ने हाम्रो Furbatashi Sherpa who's climbed Everest 21 times. So his house was our destination. And we walked up. The trek was actually really nice. And it was the first time that I'd been in the region that high up. So it was first time for me that I actually saw Everest. So it was quite exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know. It's it was so wonderful, and very, very exciting to see this mountain that has, kept me busy all these years.
I think the one thing about covering, if I'm not interrupted, I was just thinking, the one thing about covering mountaineering is, I think for many reporters who do it, we do it through talking to climbers most of the time, and many of us have never been there, and it's always something we dream of doing, and we never really get a chance to do it. And I think for you, you've been really lucky to actually have been on the
Yeah.
trip. And yeah, okay, I'll let you
Yeah, and it
continue.
was also, for us as well, you never see that route that empty. It's so pretty, it was at its prime, and we were there in solitude to enjoy it. But at the same time, it was also very sad, all these tea houses along the road closing up and, unsure about what they were going to do. Even Namche, which is, where all these expeditions sort of, that's their starting point of, that's where they get together and party and, make a lot of noise. Namche was also very quiet. All the doors were, all the shutters were down, and so it was really sad to see that as well. We actually had, what was also interesting is that people were also very aware and didn't want, outsiders coming in. Sometimes we had to negotiate a bit and tell them that we were journalists, we were trying to cover this story. But eventually we, met Sherpa guides who were not working this season and sort of worried about, what to do. And even when we were trekking, loads of people
What they have to
coming
say.
down, porters and workers and other actually that actually lose out.
Because for them it's daily wage earning, right? Unlike for the mountaineers who are already paid a certain amount of money for doing this job.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's the
and they're also
that's
paid
the
a lot better,
category of
and the
people.
guys are paid much better.
Yeah. And I think this would have been a very exciting season for Nepal if we did not see the situation as it is of now, because the government had just announced the 2020 Visit Nepal year, and they were hoping to see more mountaineers in this year. Working for the wire agency for last 5 years, how is it different for you to work during a crisis season from the work you do during regular coverage?
It was strange that, exactly 5 years ago, we were in the middle of another national crisis. And, my sister was also, I think, joined in listening in. She always tells a story that, right after I was like, oh my God, this is news. And I was holding my laptop and making calls and talking to editors in Delhi about this. And actually, this pandemic is very different. We're staying in, whereas then we were, all rushing out for safety. But at the same time, there are very many similarities as well. In these challenging times, I think journalists have to think about several things. First, you have the pressure of getting the story. And at the same time, there are, multiple challenges like logistical limitations, mobility issues. And also, as a person, you have your, domestic demands as well, and also concern for your own safety. So you're thinking about many things when you work in a situation like this, I think. But as journalists, we have an important role in keeping communities informed. And especially in times like this, the demand for news and that they can believe really goes up. Man, constantly scrolling on there for latest stories. Sometimes forget that we're also frontline workers. On media we see pictures of doctors and security personnel, right? But the people who are bringing those photos and videos to you, they are also, frontline workers. That picture has been taken by someone who's, decided to go out with a camera or a pen to keep people informed, right? I think we forget that sometimes. Story-wise, I think in times like these, you really need to stay alert and keep your eyes open because everybody's rushing to cover the same story, and you want to see, what different angle you can you can put out, and something that we keep in mind when we were covering the earthquake as well. We were also looking at, other earthquakes and how they've been covered and what issues were covered then. But of course, the pandemic is something very new, and even though Nepal has, relatively less number of cases, we're still at risk, and I guess we're all sort of watching how things will move forward.
Mm. There's that old
But
saying. Sorry, you're saying something.
no, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about something I heard most of my editors say a lot when we were doing the coverage for the earthquake, that journalists live
Mm-hmm.
for times like these. This
Mm.
is your moment to be a star. So I'm just wondering, like, how does it work for you? Are you somebody who believes in something like that, or are you more of a fan of solution-oriented journalism?
Um, yeah, I understand what you mean when people say that, crisis situations is where you can shine. Um, I'd like to share something with you. I mean, this is a new term that I heard recently. It's called moral injury.
Mm-hmm.
It's when, as a person, you are, either witnessing or failing to prevent or even perpetuating something that
Mm.
clashes with your own personal beliefs. Um, I think crisis reporting is something like that, for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pleasant at all. I mean, if I, lost my house or my family or anything, I wouldn't want another person. I don't know if I would welcome a journalist to come in and speak with me and,
Right.
share my story.
Mm.
But as a journalist, you are put in that position to speak to a person who's suffered a lot. And for a story, it's better if you find a more compelling
Mm.
story. So I would say I prefer more solution oriented, um, and stories that give a better worldview while they talk about the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan uh, of crisis reporting. Although as journalists, that's, as you said, it's an important time to report, and you have a more
Yeah. I agree with you when you say that reporting can sometimes be crass because you're just pushing into people's lives, and um, I'm sure we've all, as journalists, been through experiences when somebody did not want to speak to you and you still had to push through just because you're trying to find out what's happening. But I
mm,
think as journalists, we're also privileged people, right? Because there are times when people trust you with their lives, especially when you're doing long form journalism and when you're spending lots of time talking to people, interviewing them for days, sometimes for weeks. They put so much trust in you, and putting they're trusting you with their life. And I just feel that it's so special when you're able to spend time with your sources like that. And I think some of the best stories probably come from that those kinds of interviews. And at this point, I'm also wondering because you have also done other kinds of writings besides doing journalism, where you've spent more time talking to people. And I know you've also written poetry um, inspired by people you met during the course of your work. So, would you like to talk to us a little bit about how different it is for you to do journalistic work? Um, how different it is for you to write journalistic pieces from stories of poetry. And I'm also wondering at this point if you'd like to read us one of your poems.
I think it's very different for me. And having worked a few years now, when it comes to journalistic pieces, I'm very sure of myself, mostly. Uh, I know, I have a structure in my head. I know who I need to interview, what elements I need in the story, what data I can add to make the story richer. So, I'm, I sort of have, if I'm approaching a story, I know what to look for.
Mm.
Uh, But when it comes to fiction or poetry, I would say I'm still an aspiring writer. I'm usually very unsure of my pieces, and it's a lot more personal process for me. When I think with journalism, I can sort of distance myself and look at the story more objectively, but with fiction and poetry, it's very personal, and there's no structure or checklist. I'm just writing from heart. And I find that I draw a lot from my own experiences, especially in the first draft is, somebody who knows me can probably look at that and say, oh, you're talking about this and that part of your life. But I try to then distance myself and edit and make changes. We talked about this earlier. I think I'll read one piece that I wrote. This was written after I'd done a story about child marriage, about these young girls who were eloping out of choice into marriage. And it was a very, as you said, people trust you with their stories. And this was a really heartfelt conversation I had with a few young girls who had been married or had decided to elope. So I'll read that to you. It doesn't have a title or anything, so I'll just start off. Let me pull it up. Yeah. It was dusk when I held your hand tight and walked into your house, bidding farewell to mine. Oh, how my mother wailed, worried I had fallen off a cliff when I didn't come home from school. How she grew red with anger when she found out I had fallen indeed, but in love with you. In love with you, your face, your songs, the way you touched my hair, how you called me Maya like I was yours when no one was around. Not in love with, I soon found out, with your spiteful words, your slaps, the way you grabbed my hair, how you ordered me when I was yours, like I was yours when everyone was around. Did I choose this? Did I ever know you? Would I run away with you now or from you?
Thank you, Paavan.
So that's
I
that.
remember reading this on Instagram. I think with the lockdown, your friends assign you to tasks to post certain things, right? And I
Yes,
remember
yeah.
this is one of the poems you have posted, and I remember wondering then. But thank you for putting that into context. It explains a lot when you tell me what it is about, and I think it's very. I just feel that it must have been so intense for you, this assignment, if you came back and wrote a poem about these girls that you met. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing.
I think, one of my most favorite things about this work is meeting people and interviewing them and hearing their stories, and as you said, them trusting you with their life stories as well. And these girls were so young, and when you're a teenager, you jump in and do quite many things suddenly. You just jump into things, but to jump into a marriage is a really big deal, and they didn't quite see that when they were in love with their.
Yeah, at this point, Paavan, I also want to thank you for saying yes to doing this conversation, because I know that for journalists, you're usually on the other side of the microphone. So thank you for saying yes. It's a privilege to be asking you these questions.
Thank you for reaching out. This is interesting, and also, it's an opportunity for me to think about what I do and introspect a little bit. So that was nice as well.
I'm glad. Okay, so I do have a couple more questions for you. We'll also be taking some questions from our audience here, and if anything comes up on the post, I'll be asking you to answer those as well. But I do have a couple more questions for you, so we'll keep talking in the meantime. So moving on to a couple of other questions that I had in mind, Paavan. I was just thinking, so reporting for a wire agency is a completely different game, even within journalism. There's a lot of competition. You're always trying to break first, right? And AFP is also known as a sniper news agency. So it's of course, it's very ambitious, this task that you're dealing with as somebody working for this agency. It can also be stressful.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage?
Well, Nepal isn't so much an international radar, which is why our team here is also quite small. When there is a breaking news, for like 10, 12 hours a week long straight without a break. But at the same time, we do go for weeks without filing anything either, too, So it sort of balances itself out in terms of workload. Because of the mountaineering season, and also because it's also the quick anniversary for us here. So
Yes.
that gets quite stressful. So I usually take a break after the season ends. I wouldn't say it's so stressful because the workload isn't that demanding all the time. I guess if it was, then it would be difficult, but because it sort of balances itself out. But also you have to be alert at all times. But I enjoy it. I enjoy the job, so that helps. I love writing, so it lets me, do something I love.
So how did you come to write? For somebody who writes like you have all these different genres of writing that you've actually invested yourself into, and I was also looking through your website earlier. You also do videos. How did you come to journalism, but also how did you come to writing itself?
I didn't plan on journalism, but I always liked writing. When I was younger, my sisters used to read a lot, so I had access to their books. So I started reading quite early, and I guess when you're reading books like that, you're sort of aspired to sometimes write a book like that or a story like that. So that I think helped that ambition. I wasn't interested in news so much early on. Whenever I looked at paper, I had tons of fun pages first, and as any teenager would. But I did write poems quite early, I think. I think poems came naturally to me, and that's why I wrote them. It wasn't, also that was also not like a thought process or a planned thing. So I think writing has always been, part of who I am. So it's just a part of me. But journalism, I wasn't planning on. I was actually studying business. I was doing a BBA, and Himal South Asian ma vacancy थियो. So हाम्रो college चाँडै नै सक्ने भएर, so that it was a good opportunity, and it was something my sister suggested. So I applied and got in. It was an editorial assistant position, and I had to fact check these long form, well-researched pieces. So that was my first introduction to an editorial process and how a newsroom works and for a magazine. And so it was very good for me because it forced me to read these things. It forced me to stay updated to what was happening in Nepal and outside. And I found it fascinating. That position sort of became a springboard to a reporter position in Nepali Times. I worked there with a break for about 3 or 4 years. So that's the bulk of where I learned the basics of reporting and writing. And our editor, Kunda Dixit, was also very supportive. So he's still someone I can just, call if I have questions. So that newsroom was a wonderful experience. It was also a women-heavy newsroom, which is not really the case for most,
Cool.
young journalists. Yeah. So that was a good thing as well. It let you know that you don't have to cover just soft pieces as most women journalists are sort of bracketed into. You could cover any story, anything that you found interest of. I actually joined as a business reporter, but soon I was covering all sorts of stories, and eventually also wrote a column for them. So for me, that was, a wonderful learning experience, and also a place for me to realize that this is something I want to do, that I really enjoyed interviewing someone. Even now when I do an interview, right after an interview, I get, I wouldn't say always smiling, but I'm very motivated after an interview to write. So the joy of it, I guess, that's where I learned. Then I did a master's in journalism because I knew that's what I wanted to do, and learn how journalism was changing around the world as well, going more towards web, video, and all these different platforms that people could use for reporting. So that was also when I was working with the CNN office in Hong Kong. And all these experiences have, come together and made me realize that this is what I want to do. This is what I enjoy doing. And yeah. And then when I came back to Nepal, I worked with nepalnews.com for a while. You know of this.
I do, yes, I remember.
Yeah, before I joined AFP.
Actually, I think the only time Paavan and I really met was then, right? She and I met because she wanted to offer me her job, and that was the only time I've actually sat down with Paavan and had a conversation. And I think eventually I ended up not taking it up. But it was a nice meeting.
Yeah, we need to do that soon.
Yes, hopefully after the lockdown. And also, Paavan, because you mentioned Kundadai earlier, so I'm just thinking, every time we talk about journalism in Nepal, or at least for me, every time I've met with women journalists, we're always talking about how sexism is so big in the journalism industry in Nepal. And just wanted to share an experience. I think I have a lot of experiences related to this, also as somebody who worked as a journalist for a long time. But like I said earlier, reporting for wire agencies is a completely different game, right? And I feel like that sphere, at least when I started, was a more male-dominated sphere. I started in June 2010, and at that time, the only other woman who was also working for one of the wire agencies was Sudeshna Sarkar, who was based in Nepal for INS. And I remember how some of the other male journalists would talk about her, and how she was always referred to as a woman, and not just as another journalist. So I'm just wondering, have things changed over these 10 years? Because I assume things have, because we have started to do things differently, think about things differently, right? But how is your experience? Would you like to share some of your own experiences related to this?
Well, unfortunately, the numbers haven't changed. I think there's still just me and one more female journalist working for Wires at Shinhua, Shrishti. So the numbers haven't changed, and it's still pretty much the same faces in most wire agencies, as when you were working. I think I'm quite I'm sad that there's such camaraderie between the male journalists, not just in Wire, like overall. They're, very well connected. Sometimes they often go out, report together. That doesn't ever happen with us, such relationships are never built. And I'm not sure why. Is it because we're women, or is it because we've, just joined the industry? Well, not just for me, but, that we came in later, or I'm not sure what the reason for that is. But, that relationship really benefits them.
Is that
No, it isn't.
Okay.
No. Unfortunately, no. Yeah. So it benefits them greatly in, pursuing stories, getting contacts, finding the right people and sources for whatever they're writing, and also advancing in their jobs. Because if, somebody knows of an opportunity, they're going to tell people that are closest to them, and it's usually not a woman journalist, right? So, yeah, I think overall in the media landscape, things have changed. but we're still a long way off from where we should be. Although I think there are benefits of being a woman journalist. This is something I tell a lot of people, that whenever there's a big program, the restrooms are always clean, 3 or 4 women around.
I know. I know.
Yeah, right. And also, I think people open up to you more easily when you're interviewing people on the ground. If you're a woman,
women.
yeah, especially women, and they let you in and let you into their houses, and what's happening with them, and the comfort level is higher. So you get more compelling stories out of people. I wouldn't say the same thing about people who are in power, though. I think with them, there's still, if a woman calls, I think there's still a bit of a difference sometimes.
Yeah, I think
You were
that's
saying something.
probably a shared experience for a lot of women who work as journalists. Because
Right.
even now, if you really look at the statistics, I think there are just 16% women working as journalists in Nepal,
Mhm.
and that's not a very encouraging figure. Although we do see a lot
No.
of women as presenters on television,
Mhm.
they have very little editorial say. And what really matters, I think, for a newsroom is to have women be more expressive in terms of editorial decision making, because an inclusive newsroom is not just about faces, it's also about what kind of input your members can give to the news you're producing, right?
Right, right. And I think Freedom Forum had done a study a couple of years ago, and they found that the percentage of bylines that were women was like 6 or 7% over a period of 6 months, which is ridiculous. Yeah.
So, but that is not to say that, I just feel like sometimes we do a lot of male bashing when we have these conversations. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not to say that women journalists or colleagues or male editors have not been supportive of women in the newsrooms, because at least for me, most of my mentors were male editors who actually pushed me into becoming the journalist I became. And I've also had some very negative experiences from senior women journalists. So I think what we really need to do is to support other women who are working as journalists if we are envisioning more inclusive newsrooms and seeing possibly at least one female editor in the future.
Right, right.
It's
Yeah,
a
I
dream.
agree. Yeah, I mean, my experience in Nepali Times was really helped me what I want to do because of the environment there. And I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I'm trying to get, currently working women journalists together to form like a informal network, so we can, call each other if we need anything, or just have a conversation about if we're having difficulties with our stories, or just,
I think
just
that's a
hang
good
out.
idea. But hadn't you guys also started these bhatti crashing events?
Hmm.
I don't know. I think I remember seeing some photos on Facebook many, many years ago, but I wasn't able to join one of them, but I did get an email
Hmm.
inviting me to one of them. Do you want to say something about that?
Which one? Sorry.
There were these meetings that were happening. So women journalists meeting at bhattis and just
Oh,
reclaiming
yes,
their
yes,
spaces.
yes. Yeah, we did
Tell us
that
about it.
one, twice.
Mm.
We only did it once, I think, and that's when the idea came about. Basically, my former colleagues from Nepali Times and a few others from, I think, Republica and we had BBC. So we just got together and यस्तो हरियो पर्दा भएको भट्टी हुन्छ नि त्यस्तोमा. And it was really fun because we were just chatting and, and drinking, and all these men around us were staring at us quite like, के गरेर यो केटीहरू यहाँ भनेर. So
Did
it's,
they say
reclaiming
anything?
space. No, no, not at all. No.
Mm.
But just the idea of claiming spaces as our own that are,
Mm.
we aren't usually expected at.
Mm.
But yeah,
It's
thanks for
it's a
reminding me of that. We should do that again.
I think it's interesting how so women often get thrown these dagger looks when you're in these spaces, which have traditionally been viewed as very male spaces.
Mm,
I actually had this really um, well, an incident that made us really angry, but also made us want to laugh at. I was with this female friend who's also a journalist, sitting at this tea shop. We were drinking tea, and she was also smoking. And there was
mm-hmm.
this man at the other table who'd been kind of watching us. And just before he left, he he literally shouted at us, and he left. He said in Nepali, he said, "लाज लाग्दैन यस्तो चिया पसलमा बसेर गफ गरिरहनुलाई केटी मान्छे भएर." And we were like, what just happened? And he'd already walked off, and it took us a while to realize this something like that could even happen, but things like
Right.
that do happen, right?
They
And
do. Yeah, this Kitty Bhaera pani you get those comments, unfortunately, way more than you should. I remember more यो संविधानको लेख्ने बेला रिपोर्टिङ गरेर बेलामा it was very late because our leaders like midnight decisions, so
absolutely.
we were outside the parliament waiting for them, and I think it was past 11 that day, and so we were all waiting for them to come out and give us the decision. And there was I think he was an official from the parliament. So he just came in and he was like, "Kiti mansi bhaera pani yati rati kaam garcha?" And I didn't know what to say to him. It's like, "Oh, garcha." And it just puts things into perspective that when you're working, you want to think that, oh, I'm equal to everyone, I'm not less than anyone else. But actually, we face so many more challenges that men probably don't even think about.
Yeah, because I
And the
think in
fact that I was
journalists,
about able to say there that late, that's also a privilege that I have.
it definitely is. I think education is already a privilege, and then starting from there. And
Right.
that's why, like I was saying this earlier before you came in, I feel so much gratitude for
Mm,
so much that has been offered to me, because I don't know, it's like it's not something we can take for granted. And yeah,
exactly.
it's already a privilege to be who we are, I think. And
Right.
yeah,
And
so much
also to think of
gratitude.
right, and to think of all the people who haven't had those chances
Yeah,
or that environment, equally talented, equally capable people
absolutely.
that are not in journalism anymore because of things they have faced for being a
Mm,
woman.
yeah, absolutely. um so there are a lot of I think young women journalists who I'm sure look up to somebody like you, who's had a very high flying journalistic career. But also for like young journalists in general, what advice would you give them to sort of keep up with the work they're doing?
Um, I don't know if I'm in a position to advise people, but I can share what worked for me. Um, I think first of all, it's really important to read and stay informed. We have so many resources right now. There's no excuse to not keep ourselves informed and updated about what's going on. And I think a lot of times now we're sort of in this echo chamber. We're just listening to views and voices that match our own and confirm our own stories
Mm,
or opinions. I think it's really important to get the other side of the view as well. You may not agree with it, but you will, a different perspective is very important to understand all sides of the story.
mm,
Um, if you're just starting out, I think it's very important to get reporting experience. There are so many papers right now, and if you can get an internship or a part-time job, and that also has some issues of its own. But if you can find a place where you can try this out and know if
mm.
you really like this or not, or you're up for uh, the pressure that the job might give you later. I think that really helps you clear your head and know if you really want to do this. I think as a journalist, we're also researchers. So it's really important to research a story, and it's so easy right now, right? I sometimes wonder how journalists before us did it, especially for Wire when you have to, put out a copy so quickly. How do you get all the facts and all the right people so quickly without Google? I don't know. But yeah, research, and whenever you're covering an issue, an event, or a person, the more you research, the more you will find out about them and how you can tell their story. I think another thing that I'm not very good at, I think we should all do, is also network and cultivate relationships with people that can, it's always good to have somebody call and ask, oh, do you know this person? Can you put me in touch with this person? Or do you know someone who is an expert in this issue? So I think it's very important to cultivate relationship and network with people. Twitter is a fantastic tool. You can reach out to working journalists, working experts on different variety of sectors, and even if they may or may not respond to you, but you can see what they're putting out, and that also enriches your knowledge. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think?
In terms of advice?
Mm-hmm.
So am I on the other side of the mic now?
Yeah, the preferred one.
I think for those who are starting out, I think it's really important to keep interested in what you do, because much of journalism is storytelling, but it's storytelling about real people. And I think that's where your responsibility toward telling these stories accurately comes in, because because sometimes there's a very thin line between fiction and fact, right? And we have also seen a lot of journalists who have tampered with evidence to bend the stories and give it a slant. So I think the thing to do is to stay interested in what you're doing in terms of telling a story about somebody who's a real person. And I think as long as you remember that, then you will do justice to the story that you're telling. Because like I said earlier, it's such a big privilege to be allowed into somebody's life. And I think you have to do it honor by showing it, enough respect and justice. I just received a sign that we're close to an hour. We have not received any questions from the audience yet, but I want to ask right now if anyone has any questions for Paavan before we close this session. And if we don't, I think we can move toward closing it. Paavan, if there's anything that you felt like you wanted to share with our audience here today, and if there's something I did not ask you, now is your chance.
No, I think thank you so much for inviting me and doing this. It's been really nice to talk to you and share things that I actually haven't thought about so much before. We're always constantly working, and especially right now when you're working indoors with constantly keeping track of news in an environment where you're not really used to doing that. So this is a nice break, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Also, I've been sort of keeping my fingers crossed, saying let nothing break during the time I'm talking to Paavan, because otherwise she'll have to run away from the interview. And I think nothing has broken, so thankfully.
Yeah, I had my backup.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Paavan. Thank you for joining us in this session. I think it was, I really enjoyed having this session with you, and I'd been wanting to do this for many reasons, but one of it being that as journalists, we tell stories of a lot of different people, but I think no one really wants to tell stories about journalists, or doesn't really do it. And as you said earlier, journalists are also people who are on the front line, right, covering, especially during times of crisis. And I think it's also important to think about journalists, talk to them, and most of all, to make sure that journalists are taking care of themselves, their health, mental health, as well as in general. So thank you for joining us. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and I think our audience did too.